Hi, and thanks for listening. Before we begin, we just wanted to reassure you that if you have worked with any of our hosts or guests, that we treat your privacy with the utmost of respect. Therefore, you won't hear us divulging any confidential or identifiable details about you or your loved one in any of our episodes. Unless, of course, you would like to be featured as a guest yourself and talk about your experiences. In which case, please do get in touch with us via the contact details at the end of the show. That said, let's get on with the next episode. So welcome back to episode 6 of Over My Dead Body. I'm Nicola and I am delighted to say, Carl, I have you back this week. Hello, how are you doing?
Hey guys, yeah, it's great to be back. Here we go, episode 6. Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for your responses to episode 5 with Michael McWilliams, who was talking about his son Harvey and the work they've done with the Harvey McWilliams Foundation. We've had some amazing feedback, and I know you're all right behind Michael in the work and the efforts that he's putting in for the local community. And Carl, you're on for speaking to Tiny's wife, Chris, and we're going to have that episode next week.
Yeah, that's coming up, guys. It's going to be a lovely episode, definitely.
So this week we are tackling one of the biggest issues we probably come across as funeral directors and as celebrants, but it's possibly the issue that you as a family think you are the only one that is experiencing, and that is families at war. And there's nothing like grief and death and a funeral and inheritance to perhaps bring out those animosities and the arguments that have been bubbling away for years. So let's dive right in. And Carl, tell me, what frequency do you come across families who maybe have a little bit of a fracture?
All the time. It's really quite high. Families, unfortunately, as we've sort of alluded to, it sort of death brings out the worst in people. There's so many high emotions running for people, and as we said, there's a lot riding on this. It's a big deal for families, and sometimes it's just the littlest conversations of what sort of music are we looking at, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. It's really difficult.
And I think that's a really great point to start on, because whenever I sit down with a family and they say to me, just before we start talking, can we just let you know about our situation, our dynamic? This person doesn't speak to that person. These people fell out. We weren't really close. But, I'm sure you come across it a lot. And the truth is we come across it an awful lot, far more often than not. So please don't ever feel like you can't have that conversation with us about little bits of tensions in your family, because we see it all the time.
We do. And I also think it's the honesty as well. You've got to be honest. So we're coming to you, you're at your most vulnerable, and I know it's a difficult time, but just we've got to know things. If we don't know them, we can't assist in things, definitely.
And Carl, sometimes, as you alluded to there, the tensions can be as seemingly simple as we just don't like the music choices and we're arguing about that, right through to we can't have those people in the car together. And so give us some of the examples, without giving away any confidences, of some of the tensions that you come across.
So, it's the family dynamics. That's all it is. And people fall out all the time. And for me, we try to put those differences aside, even if it's just for that hour where we're in the crematorium, and then they can go back to hating each other. That's perfectly fine with me. And it's across the board. So, as you said, things from music to family disagreements, inheritance, you name it, it's all in there. We've had family members not wanting to get into the same cars, not even wanting to come to the service. And, you've got to try and have that sort of discussions with the families to say, look, let's just try to, act as amicably as we can, just for that short period of time.
So I think, Carl, the point you're making is that we have a whole range of tensions and family dynamics, from what might seem fairly simple that we can work through to things that are more extreme and dramatic. And actually, for your officiant, for your funeral director, it's absolutely not for us to judge or take sides or make any comment at all. We're simply there to get the best service we can for your loved one. So just as Carl said, be honest. Even if it feels something really, really insignificant, but it's bothering you, or you kind of just want to explain it to us, please don't ever feel like we're sitting there in judgment or saying you should be speaking to your dad or you should be speaking to your sister. It's simply not our place to do that.
I would agree. It's not our place, and we would, certainly me as a funeral director, I would never tell anybody what they should and shouldn't be doing. However they feel comfortable is fine with me, and we have a responsibility to then work around that and work out, some way of making sure that the funeral runs as smooth as it can.
And equally on that point, Carl and I are both in Richmond. We know people in Richmond. We're out and about the area quite a lot. We are equally not going to go and say to anybody, oh my gosh, so-and-so doesn't speak to their brother. They fell out years ago. Anything you say to us, it's a bit like a hairdresser or the nail salon. It is completely in confidence, and whatever you'd like to talk to us about with your family, it certainly won't be shared anywhere beyond the bounds of that room. So you should feel really comfortable in speaking to us.
I would agree, Nicola, because it's got to be the strictest of confidence that when we talk to families, that we really don't tell anybody. It really does stay with us, and that's a really, really important point.
So we know those dynamics are in place. We know that there are lots of reasons why families may not be getting along brilliantly at the time of planning a funeral. Grief has a real way of playing with people's emotions as well, if there's shock in there as well, if it's been a very unexpected death. And we understand all of that, and all of us are trained to deal with those emotions. So I think the point Carl made earlier was about, actually, as your officiant, as your funeral director, all that matters to us is that we get to the very best service for you with the least amount of distress. So Carl, talk me through some of the things you might be saying to families if you sit down with them and they say, oh, we just need to tell you, we think it's going to be a bit tricky because someone's ex-wife's coming along, or we have a strange son. What's the sort of things you'd be talking to them about?
Yeah, so, there'll be nothing new. That's the thing. So it won't be the first time I've heard things. And as I say, we've been doing this job for over 10 years, and nothing genuinely would surprise me. So we try to work things out to say, okay, well, what are the chances of this happening? So where are we at? So let's say it's an ex-partner of some sort who's going to turn up. Are they really going to be turning up, or is it just something that you're panicking about? Have we heard from this person? Has there been any contact? If there has, and then potentially is, then obviously then we need to work around things. One of the questions we get asked quite regularly as funeral directors is, can we stop this person coming into the service? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because the crematoriums and sort of cemeteries and things are literally public places, and you can't stop people. We've been asked, can we put bouncers on the doors? And things? No, we can't. We're not. That's not our job. Our bearers and our team have to remain safe, and it's our duty to look after the staff as well as the congregation as well. So you can't just have bouncers on. It just doesn't work. Over the course of the few years we've been doing this. So yes, as I said, we've never really had any trouble at all. And when people do turn up at the crematoriums, families, or even churches, families are more focused on the service and being there. There's a purpose we're there. It's to celebrate somebody's passing. And usually families put that to one side and we just get on with the service.
It's such a good point, because I think for all the times I've heard families say, we may have an issue here, these people might not get along, there might be a bit of bother, there might be some trouble. It very, very rarely, if ever, comes to anything, because I think everybody does think, actually, we need to be respectful at a funeral. I can't speak for the wake. I think there's been a few fisticuffs at wakes. Certainly the time that anybody's in a church or a crematorium, we tend to find that people just respect the solemnity and the ceremony of the occasion and just manage to put a lid on those emotions.
I mean, there are daggers across the room, obviously. That always happens, so you can't stop that. So obviously that's how I would sort of put things across to family members and guide them through it step by step. But how about you as a celebrant? How do you handle that?
Very similar to yourself. I think you're dealing with more the logistics of how do we make sure everybody is safe and minimise the distress. For me, as a celebrant or a vicar, we're getting much more into the detail of the story and the depth of somebody's life. And this is where we can sometimes start to have those real difficult conversations about, gosh, maybe mum had a baby they gave up for adoption when she was young, and should they have a place in the conversation or not? And if somebody had a difficult first marriage, should we include that as part of their story or not include that as part of their story? Or we don't speak to these people, but we know they'll be at the service, so do they deserve a mention? And I would say it is all a conversation. So it's just about, what do you feel comfortable with as a family? Just we talk through the kind of implications of mentioning people, not mentioning people. Was it part of somebody's story? Does it feel like it's a significant part of somebody's story? And more than anything, what do you think your loved one would want us to say about that part of their life?
I'd agree, and I think we're talking about family disputes here and not wanting to include family members, when sometimes when families are perfectly fine and a family member misses somebody out, it's not done on purpose, but then that causes even more problems. If we've missed a name, or even missed a little story that they thought was going to be included, sometimes that starts a war as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, massively so. And when I'm speaking to families, if there's 5 grandchildren, for example, and I've got a little piece about 4 of them, a special memory, but we've missed the last one, that's always my job to say, oh, so is there anything for Ben that we can add in, because we haven't got a memory for him? Because you would hate for all 5 grandchildren to be sitting there and us only have done the story about 4 of them. So you should feel really confident that your officiant, your vicar, whoever's doing the service is picking up on those little bits of detail.
And that makes a good vicar and a good celebrant, is picking up on those smaller points, just to make sure that everybody is included, to make sure that the service can run as smoothly as possible.
And I think what I'd also say to my families very often is, you will see what I'm going to write. So you tell me what you think you want to say. Let me write that up into the story that I think you're asking me to tell, and then I'll send it back to you. And you read that through, and do you feel like there's anything in there that's going to cause any alarm to anybody? It's going to cause any more distress? But you will see all of that, so you can be really confident when you sit down on the day, actually, we don't think we're going to upset anybody through this.
Yeah, I would agree with that point. The problem as well that we do have is that really some families are completely, they don't speak to each other, they're completely at war, and they really don't speak to one another. And again, that's fine, that's the family dynamics, and we've got to get round that. It's also quite difficult when the family members don't divulge that information. So you can only go on what you've been told. And sometimes I've been caught out where I haven't sort of spoken to somebody who is quite a close family member. It's just simply because I didn't even know who they were, and you wouldn't necessarily make that association until somebody tells you. So the more information we get, the better. For me, it certainly does help.
It's such a great point, because sometimes when I'm standing outside the crematorium at the end of a service, and someone will come over to me and say, "Oh, you didn't mention this, or you didn't talk about this person," and I genuinely have to say, I can only work with what the family gave me and the picture that they gave me. And I'm really sorry if we've missed out something that's important to you, but the reflection time, the music that we play, that was your time to sit and think about those memories that are important to you. But Carl, when you have a family who are completely at loggerheads, you've got different requests coming in from different angles. Somebody wants to change to music. Somebody wants to have 2 cars rather than 1. Somebody wants to close the curtains rather than leave. How on earth do you deal that when you've got families who just can't agree?
It's really difficult. It really is genuinely so difficult. But I always try to focus on one family member, so the next of kin. So who's taking charge of the service? Who's paying for it? Who's really doing absolutely everything? And at that point, you then focus on one person and say, look, we need to pull this together, because you've got somebody, as you say, someone wants this limo, somebody wants that, and before you know it, you're in a complete mess, because you've not got anything to go on. So you try and focus on one person who's generally going to pull that together and look after things, and it then becomes sort of an extension of you, and say, right, okay, here's what I'm looking for, what can you help us out? And that's it does work. It does.
And that's why back in that very first call, your funeral director will ask you for a contact of a next of kin, because that's the person that if we genuinely can't get an agreement, or we get in 7 different requests for things, there has to be that one person that we can go back to and say, right at the beginning of this process, this was the next of kin details, and therefore that's who we need to go to make decisions, and we will only do what they're asking us to do.
And I think with the conflicts, over funerals, and then obviously we have the disputes, the problems with that is that it can sometimes lead to delaying the funeral. It literally puts a stopper on everything, and until that's resolved, we literally can't do anything. And I think that's something to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just prolonging the agony for everybody else.
We need a compromise. That's as simple as that's how you work around things.
So I think that's something that's really important that me as an officiant can really help with, in terms of being someone who's slightly more removed, who doesn't have the emotion of the original arguments, who isn't involved in that dynamic, and can really look at what's the dispute in terms of the funeral itself, what's the dispute in terms of the story we're writing, or who gets to speak, and what can we negotiate. I can act as that go-between if you aren't speaking to a member of your family, or it's uncomfortable for you to have the conversation.
I can very much go and sort of be the middleman a little bit and just say, okay, what can you live with? What of this can you absolutely not bear to hear? But what could you live with? And constantly, so many times, we're just doing that little edging. People give a bit of give and take from each side. And you get to a point that isn't perfect, but people can live with for the service.
Definitely. I think the last thing that anybody really wants to do is to go down the legal route, because that, again, that delays the funeral as well. But sometimes it comes to it, and then that's it. We have to look into wills, and then we go through lines, next of kin and who's around, and solicitors and things. And it does get quite messy from there on. But if that's what we have to do, then that's what we do. It's as simple as that.
And before you even get to that point, there's so many solutions I think we can come to before then, in terms of, if you can't agree on songs, then we could play a mashup of songs. So we've done that before. Producer Steve is brilliant at editing tracks together, where if we've got 5 songs, so all 5 grandchildren want to pick a song that they want to be played, but we just don't have the time, we'll get those songs, we'll take 20-30 seconds of each one, we'll put them all together, and you've got them all there. And that's a brilliant solution when you can't decide about it. If you sort of think, we don't want somebody to speak because they don't have a right to speak. Maybe they could just send a couple of lines in to me that I can put in the eulogy that becomes their voice. So there's lots and lots of solutions we can get to before we get to the point of falling out and legals.
Yeah, definitely.
What I'd equally say on top of that is, don't forget the technology we've got in place these days. So if there's a family member who just feels like they're not able to be there, to be in the same room, we have, of course, got all of the video technology that they can watch it somewhere else. Just very recently, I had that situation where a family member felt uncomfortable, but they drove to the crematorium. They sat in the car park while they saw their loved one being carried in, and then they logged on to watch the service online, and then they left. And there's always a way around some of these difficulties.
Yeah, I agree. And the technology nowadays is fantastic at crematoriums. You literally feel like you are really in the room with during the service.
It is all about communicating, about having conversations, about if there's things that your other loved ones, other parts of your family might not be happy with, don't surprise them. Just say, this is what we're thinking, this is an idea. We might, one of the biggest disputes sometimes is about church versus crematorium. What's the right thing to do? So, Carl, we've touched briefly on some of the dynamics we might face, some of the difficulties that families might have. But do you have any tips or advice for families if they're thinking, we've got to go through this, and I know it's just going to end in a load of arguments? What could they do to try and avoid some of that?
Yeah. So the first thing is, of course, is just starting the conversation. That's as simple as that gets. But I think also you've got to think about the boundaries of where you are and what we're doing. So, in a church, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. You can't have people shouting and bawling and, saying things that they shouldn't be, certainly in a church or even in a crematorium. It doesn't matter where you are. But it's certainly setting those boundaries and just thinking, well, what would Mum think of this situation? What would Dad think if we were here? And then the dynamics changes with the family. A lot of families then say, actually, okay, yeah, let's rethink things and let's try and look at the positives.
And it's funny you should say that, because very often I see families and they're worrying about, I'm really scared of telling the grandchildren this is the music we've picked, or whoever it might be, an ex-wife that we don't really want them there, and they build it up to be a really, really big issue. And then actually when they just talk about it, it's nowhere near the concern that they thought it was going to be.
Sometimes it's not as bad as what actually people think. But again, if it is, and it's really bad, we've got to sit through a service for 40 minutes. And at the end of the 40 minutes, everybody goes their separate ways and no one talks to each other again. And that's, unfortunately, that does happen. It is sad, but that's just the way of life is. You can't get around it.
It is the reality. And if you're sitting here thinking, when anything happens to me, I think it will start an absolute war in my family, then plan your funeral with the songs you want, write your own eulogy, have all of the decisions made, and then there's nothing for them to fall out about.
Have it all written down, because if you've got it written down and it's all there, then no one's going to argue, because that's what you've written. Simple as. I wouldn't go against what my mum would put down, that's for sure.
So, Carl, we have talked about some of those issues that might come up, some of those tensions and ways that we can help to negotiate, help to smooth things out, get to a point where everybody's as comfortable as they can be, provide solutions. But what happens? Let us into the mind of Carl Tate, the funeral director, when it all starts to look like it's going down the road of fisticuffs at a service. What are you thinking? What do you do?
Yeah, it's all going pear-shaped. I mean, thankfully for me, in the years I've been doing this, we've never really come to any major sort of blows, certainly at services. The wakes, that's out of my remit, so they can do what they wish there. It's usually for me when you can sort of feel the tension in the air. And it's all about minimising the sort of the disruption to the service and just sort of having a quiet word in somebody's ear. There's no bouncers at services or anything like that. I certainly wouldn't ask any of the staff or our team to try and get in the way of an argument. But usually the families just sort it out. I mean, obviously the families square up to one another. And it is just sort of handbags at dawn almost, as they say. But it's usually just kept to a minimum, which thankfully I've been very lucky in the years. I've not had any serious problems.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point we made right at the start of the show, in that while we hear this an awful lot, that we think there are tensions and there might be some difficulties at the service, 99.9% of the time they come to absolutely nothing. And in almost 1,000 services, I think there's one where I've had to ask a gentleman to leave. So we were talking through the eulogy, telling the story of the gentleman who died. There was started to be some little cutting comments under this gentleman's breath. And then those got louder and louder, to the point where it was starting to be really disruptive. And at that point, I very calmly just stopped the service and said, I'm really sorry, I feel like we're detracting the focus away from the deceased. I'm going to give you two options. Either you can just take a moment, breathe, sit back down and remain quiet for the rest of the service. Or if you don't feel you can do that, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And he kind of swore at me and said, who was I to tell him he couldn't be at this service? And again, I just, well, it's up to you. We are here to focus on the deceased, on the loved one. It's entirely up to you. You either be quiet, sit down, or you will be leaving, and got kind of more stern. And luckily, there were 4 fairly big, burly blokes around this gentleman who said, oi, time to go, and hauled him out. And that's one time in 1,000. And I think I will always say to my families, look, don't worry, there is a way of dealing with it that if I remain calm, if I just say to people, you have a choice.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. It's the persona that you give off as a person. So a lot of people obviously know who I am. I'm quite fairly relaxed and quite quiet and chilled. And if you remain calm throughout services, even when things are really going pear-shaped, you just have that element of calm just to make control that situation. And certainly calling somebody out like that, it does. It sort of, I think, sometimes brings it home to them to think, and then they realise what they're actually doing really isn't acceptable. And then we go back to the boundaries of what is acceptable and what isn't, and that really isn't acceptable. And and rightly so, just leave the service. It's the best solution, really, and it will certainly in that situation, definitely.
And it's almost like the service polices itself, because there are so many other people within that room who are kind of doing the police's job, where it's just like, hang on, we all know there is tension simmering here, but actually it isn't about any of us today.
I mean, I've had certain scenarios where I've spoken to police. I've some friends who are police officers, and I've just said, what's the situation? Could we have a presence of the police? And the answer is no, because the police officers are so stretched, so they've got their own jobs to do rather than wanting to babysit funerals. It's just they can't do it. So if there is a problem, then yes, the police can be called. They'll come out on a 999 shout, but inevitably there'll be it won't just be one person who gets arrested. It's usually 2 or 3, and then that does ruin services, and then that is where everything just really does go wrong.
Absolutely. And when we were talking about solutions and ways around some of these tensions, there's also things that families will sometimes say to me about, well, we just don't want to see them at the end of the service, or we just want to get off because we don't want to talk to certain family members. Or again, if you're just honest with us and tell us what you would like to happen in that service. There are 2 exits to a crematorium. We can show some people out of another door. You can get straight in the limo and be driven away. We can ask everybody to remain in the chapel while you make your exit. We can make everybody else leave and you stay in the chapel. So there's lots of ways we can just remove those flashpoints.
There's so many different scenarios. And you say one of the easiest ones is literally just having them, straight out of the crematorium, straight into the cars and away. And, sometimes families, they have separate wakes. They do in different buildings, different areas. And that helps as well. But if they're literally just in the car and away, that sort of, again, it sort of minimises those flashpoints, as you say.
Absolutely. And just when you were talking about the police attending or not attending, it just brought to mind a question that we have been emailed in to the show that I would like to ask you about, if you can answer, please. And that is, if we have a family member who is in prison, are they able to attend, and what are the options for them? Would you advise them attending?
Yes, I mean, of course, the prison services have their own rules and regulations on who's allowed out and so on. And, they usually are accompanied by, police officers. They can attend, and usually, everybody's well behaved, and it's an opportunity to see that person who has obviously been, sent to prison. There are, again, as we mentioned about the technology side of things, so if they're not allowed out of the prison, they can watch, the live stream link, which again helps, and it makes them feel included. But yeah, certainly people are allowed to attend, definitely.
And if somebody wanted to organise that, would they just do that through you and you'd get in touch with the prison?
We can do, but usually the best point of contact is just going straight to the prison. Obviously, the family will know, which prison they're in, and they usually have like a family liaison officer or some contact at the prison itself, and they can arrange that. And then obviously there's certain paperwork and certain rules and regulations that they have. I don't know them exactly, but certainly we have had it where prisoners have been to services several times.
And I think that's kind of looking at the logistics of how prisoners would attend. And sometimes families will say to me, is it right that they're there? We feel a little bit ashamed. Should they be there? And whatever anybody's done in their life, if they've lost someone, they're still mourning. And one of the brilliant things about a funeral is that it lets us share our grief and be together in that experience. So if you feel that they're part of your family and they need to share that experience with you, don't ever feel ashamed about them being there, or that, is it right? Is it appropriate? It might not be for some families, but you do whatever feels right for you and for your family. So I feel like there is so much more that we could go into in terms of family disputes, but we do have a time limit on our podcast, and we do have a water pistol on the table. Producer Steve is firing it in mine and Carl's direction at the moment, so I'm going to wrap it up there. But hopefully the things that you take out of that conversation around family disputes and tensions are: you are perfectly normal. More families we see have family tensions and dynamics than don't. So please don't think it's just your family. It's every family, even ours. Please be as honest as you can about what those dynamics are, what the tensions are. Let us know how we can help you in negotiating and managing those, so that we really have the best service possible for your loved one, but minimise any distress for you and your family on the day. Just be honest, let us help you. And there are loads and loads of solutions out there that we can come up with, and be creative to try and find the best service. And please try not to worry too much. As Carl and I have both emphasised, the majority, a good 99.9% of services where we think there might be a little bit of tension, never ever come to anything. So everybody just understands and respects the ritual of a funeral. So hopefully that helped. And if you're facing that struggle yourself, you've got a little bit more confidence to start the conversation. So that brings us towards the end of our episode today and our regular feature of favourite funeral moments. So Carl, I'm going to throw to you. What's your favourite moment of the week?
So I'm going to go back to many, many years ago. I was looking after a family, and the gentleman who sadly passed was teaching his granddaughter Italian. And it's something I picked up on, and it's something that it was a feel-good factor for me, that the idea sort of came to me that the service obviously was all in English. The vicar was doing all of his service, but what I actually did was I copied the order of service from English over to Italian. So when we came into the church and I handed the granddaughter this, her own bespoke order of service, which was all in Italian, it made her smile, and it made her, obviously it was a difficult day for her. You could see she was visibly, distressed, upset, but handing her this little A5, card with all of these details on, which was in Italian, she made her feel at ease. And it was one of those moments where you just think, yeah, that's just, I've done all right there. I've done well.
I love that. It's such a gorgeous, gorgeous story. And don't forget, with those order of service sheets, they can be anything you want. So we've done bookmarks, we've done football programmes, We've done times where one family even went to creating a little CD that they gave out to everybody of with their loved one's favourite tracks on, so just a photograph on the back. And we've done playlists, so album covers. So there's so many ways we can do an order of service. It doesn't just have to be the sheet.
There is. I mean, the possibilities are endless. If you go back to your traditional Catholic services, you can have everything printed. You've got all of that simple, traditional, and then you can go wacky and crazy. You literally can. The possibilities are endless, and if families can create these in their own minds, then we can create them on paper.
Perfect, thank you. And my favourite moment of the week is actually a reception rather than the funeral this week. So I tend to call them receptions rather than wakes, because I just think wake's quite a cold word. But it was a reception after a service for a gorgeous woman who'd asked if everybody could come to the service in their wedding outfit, so their favourite wedding costume. So we were all very dressed up, heels, gorgeous dresses, the men, some were in tails. And the party she wanted afterwards, which started at about 5 o'clock, was cocktails and canapes in her favourite bar. There was a jazz singer. It very much felt like a wedding vibe. There was a photo booth, there was a caricaturist, all those little elements that make a really great party. There wasn't sadness. There was so much laughter, so much fun. And what everybody was saying was, this is the party she would absolutely love to have been at. She would have loved to have heard our laughter. She would love to have heard that singing and joined in with the band on stage. And it didn't feel inappropriate. It didn't feel like we were being disrespectful. It felt every inch like it was the party that she wanted and deserved. So don't be scared if you feel like that wake, that reception afterwards isn't as serious as you feel it should be. You can have a lot of fun and really, really bring the colour of your loved one out with those events. Got a little lump in my throat now after Carl's story and remembering being at that reception. Excuse me. We are human after all. There's no AI on this podcast. So Carl, just to wrap up, we have our question of the week, and this came in from Simon. So Simon, thank you so much for getting in touch with the show. But Carl, tell us, are people cremated in their coffin, or do you remove them from the coffin to cremate them and then recycle the coffin?
I think the common misconception of this dates back to many, many years ago when there used to be what would be almost like a clip-around coffin. So the deceased would obviously be placed in a coffin, and then an outer shell would be placed around the original coffin. The ceremonial part of the service would take place, and then just before the cremation was due to take place, then that part of the coffin would be then removed, but it hadn't been in direct contact with the deceased. So 100%, everybody's cremated in their coffin and nothing is ever recycled.
This is what I love about this podcast. I learned so much from Carl and everything that's in his brain. It's brilliant. So thank you so much. Well, we've got lots more questions to ask over the coming weeks, but as always, if you have anything that you would like us to ask or any myths you would like us to bust, then please do get in touch. So we're coming towards the end of this episode for this week, but we have some really exciting news on a couple more appearances of the podcast as well that we wanted to tell you about. So coming up on Monday, the 8th of September, Carl and I are going to be speaking to Zetland FM, who are based over in the Redcar area, and also talking to them about maybe doing a report for the Gazette. So if you're over the Middlesbrough Teesside area, tune in round about 10:20 on the 8th of September, and we'll be on Zetland FM going into much more detail about everything we're doing with the show. But the really, really big, exciting news is Saturday, the 27th of September, a date for your diaries. That's Stockton Crematorium's open day. And we are going to be recording the live finale to this season of Over My Dead Body. So if you're coming along to the open day at Stockton Crematorium, we will be, myself and Carl and producer Steve, will be there taking your questions, not broadcasting live, just recording live. We're not that brave yet, but taking all of your questions. You get to meet us, answer anything that you'd like us to answer, and then that will be the final episode that goes out for this season before we come back to you again later in the year. So Saturday, the 27th of September, at Stockton Crematorium, and thank you so much to the guys there for inviting us along. You excited about that, Carl?
Yeah, it's going to be great. Really looking forward to it. Thankfully, as you said, yes, it's not going out live, so we'll it'd be good. It'd be nice to meet people, and certainly please do come down, say hello, bring your questions along. It'd be fantastic to see you.
So thank you so much for tuning in again to another great episode. Episode 6, we are flying through these. We hope that gave you some help and support. And I personally cannot wait till we get on to next week's episode, episode 7, where Carl will be taking us through a story with one of his families. So thanks for listening. Keep those conversations going. Be kind to each other, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you for listening, and we really hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this week's episode. Remember that you can get in touch with us anytime to ask a question, offer to be a guest, or to request that we bust a particular myth. You can get in touch via any of our social accounts over My Dead Poddy on Facebook, Insta, or TikTok. Or you can drop us an email at overmydeadpoddy@gmail.com. Just a reminder that whilst all of us work in the funeral industry, none of us are fully qualified grief counsellors. And therefore, if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed today, we highly recommend that you seek out professional or medical support to help you with those conversations. Should you need any support, please do get in touch and we can hopefully signpost you in the right direction, but we can't offer those services ourselves. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to bring you the next episode.